Hello, I'm Peter Orker of Peter Orker Piano Tuition, and welcome to today's video, which is the next in my series of A to Z of piano composers and pianists, and we've reached the letter H. So for letter H, I've chosen the Austrian composer Joseph Haydn. Well, Haydn was born in 1732, which means he was around in the very earliest days of the piano, an instrument that was invented around about 1700. So he was really and truly one of the pioneers. Over the years, Haydn has kind of acquired the nickname of Papa Haydn, and indeed is often referred to as the father of the symphony. But do you know, he was also one of the pioneers of piano writing, piano music. And he wrote many piano sonatas which are very attractive and fun to play. They've kind of become a little bit overshadowed by the sonatas of Mozart and Beethoven, but Beethoven particularly was influenced by Haydn's sonatas, in fact modelled many of his earlier sonatas on those of Haydn. Some of the first piano sonatas of Beethoven are even dedicated to Haydn. So why was Haydn important? Well, the key lies in the way he developed the concept of sonata form. The sonata, as a musical entity, takes its name from the formal arrangement of the first movement. Sonatas are usually in three movements. A fast movement, a slower second movement, and then a fast third movement again. But it's the first movement which is written in a sonata form. And I've taken one of his sonatas, one of the Haydn sonatas, the one in E flat, number 16.49. And I'm just going to use this, the first movement of this sonata, just to illustrate sonata form for you. It begins like this, with what's known as the first subject of the sonata. Just think of the subject as the first tune, really, if you like. And it begins sort of like this, quite bold and forward-looking. So on. After the first subject ends, what might we expect next? Well, I guess a second subject, and that is absolutely true. But between the first subject and the second subject is something called a bridge passage. And in this one, it's got a more lyrical sound to it. It goes like this. And continues in that sort of vein. Well, when we get to the end of the bridge passage, we're now into the second main tune of the sonata. And he does something quite clever, actually. He takes the beginning of the first subject, the very first thing we heard, remember this? And he begins like that, but transforms it and expands it into a completely new character for the music, like this. And so on. Well, he does something even more interesting, because actually he makes the second subject into three quite distinct parts. That was the first part of it you just heard. The second part takes that left hand idea and creates a melody against it by crossing the hands like this. and then moves into a third part of the second subject, which is kind of completely different still, like this. And then there's a double bar line. And double bar lines in music usually means either the end of the piece completely or the end of a major kind of section of the piece. And this is indicating in sonata form the end of the first major kind of section of the piece. And we call that section the exposition. And in the exposition, what the composer is doing there is exposing, if you like, all the musical ideas that are going to be heard in the piece. Often at the end of the exposition as well, there's a repeat sign, so you go back and you do the whole thing again. So we've got our main tunes. We've got our first subject, our bridge passage, and then our second subject divided into 3 sections. We then move into the second main section of our sonata movement, and we call that the development section. And the reason why we call it the development section is because the composer takes the ideas that we heard in the exposition and then he develops those ideas. He expands them, he puts them through different key structures and so on. Now I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I just want to illustrate how that works with part 3 of the second subject. Just to give you a reminder of how that goes, it starts off like this. It's got that kind of da 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 rhythm, okay? Now, if we look at what happens to that in the development section, he takes that rhythm and he puts it deep down in the bass, and he puts it in different keys. Some of the chords he uses are almost, for the classical period, quite wild, like for instance this one. And he just mixes that all up. So let me just play a little bit of that. And so on. And it does an awful lot of stuff with that, generally speaking, all the way through there. Okay, well, what do you think happens next? Well, at the end of the development section, we get our third main section of the piece, which is called the recapitulation, or recap. And all that means is we go back to the original musical ideas, pretty much unscathed from the first exposition section, but it's never an exact repeat of the exposition section. It's as if the musical ideas have undergone a sort of change in character through the development section. It's like they're going on this journey, and their characters, like human characters, change as a result of the experience of what happened to them in the development section. And so it starts off very similar to the exposition. This is the recapitulation section, begins like this. And so on, remember that? And on it goes, and it's really very much a sort of repetition, really, but with some differences between how it's re-performed as to how you first heard it in the exposition section. Well, that's a very quick and dirty sort of overview of sonata form, and it's something that, as I said, Haydn was very much a pioneer of, and composers like Mozart and Beethoven, especially Beethoven, took that form and basically ran with it and took it on even further. And the sonata form is used in various ways by many and most, in fact, subsequent composers right through the history of music, almost up, well, actually up to the present day. So we have it. Oh, and remember how I said that Haydn is sometimes referred to as the father of the symphony? Well, this links up with his approach to composing piano sonatas, because a symphony, in terms of its form, is pretty much a sonata for orchestra. So, well, I hope you enjoyed today's A to Z. And if you want to hear the whole of that sonata, there are plenty of versions of it on YouTube you can search for. Just search for Haydn Sonata in E flat, and it's Hob, that's H-O-B, that's its index number, 16, which is normally written in Roman numerals, 16, dot 49, which is usually written in Arabic numbers. Well, look out for next week's A to Z composer or pianist, where we'll have reached the letter I. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and share. And if you want to find out more about piano lessons, online piano lessons with me, then do visit peterorker.net, where you'll find out everything you need to know about that. Oh, and check out my Tuesday tip for better piano playing. Well, that will be on Tuesday, of course. So, bye for now.